How are we doing, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel and another week of my running back tiers and rankings. This time around, of course, for week 11, we've got Thursday night football tonight, and we've got a whole lot of players, crucial key players at the running back position, missing due to either injuries or week 11 buys here, from Ken Walker to Travis Etienne. We've got Leonard Fournette out, the tandem in Miami, Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert. A lot to dive into here, and you're going to see some interesting names and opportunities for starting caliber players potentially this week filter into the back half of today's episode as a result. So, as always, if you're new around here, smash that subscribe button down below, turn the bell on so you're never late for a new piece of content. I'll be posting this episode every week from here on out, in addition to other fantasy football related content throughout the week. So make sure you're plugged into all that stuff, and I will see you there. Let's dive in. All right, what we've been doing here lately is just tossing the best of the best up there on the board. Of course, we're all going to have disagreements about the order of these players, but we know who the best four are at this point in time for week 11 fantasy football. So there is one specific situation I wanted to talk through a little bit, because I've seen a lot of Christian McCaffrey hesitancy and pullback from obviously the game we saw on Sunday Night Football. There was a very interesting dynamic on display between him and Elijah Mitchell. So I'm just going to toss a couple of stats at you for your discretion. Do with them as you so please. But they are as such, and the reason for him being my RB3 against the Arizona Cardinals this week are that he had a 65-35% snap count percentage split with Elijah Mitchell, so 65% going to CMC, 35% to Mitchell. What was really interesting is the opportunity share was dead even. They were both at 50%, 20 apiece. Something to keep your eye on. They may not want to get him above that threshold. Both of these players, this is a crucial number and something to think about from a dynasty perspective, but both of them have relatively low BMIs, and I think that maybe San Francisco is starting to learn from their lessons in the past, that if they run these smaller, less, thick running backs into the ground over and over again 25 plus times per game, they're just not going to have the bodily insulation and cushioning to absorb those hits and stand up to that contact for a significant amount of time. That's why you've seen both of these players frequently injured as of late. Mitchell early in his career, CMC the last 2 seasons up until this year. So an interesting thing to process and think about there. The other 3 guys, though, we've got Eckler against Kansas City, Saquon against Detroit. That is one hell of a matchup for Saquon. And then Derrick Henry against Green Bay on Thursday Night Football. Let's dive into Tier 2. So here are my running backs 5 through 9 for this week. Starting it off with Josh Jacobs against the Denver Broncos. Had an absolute party. 32 fantasy points in half PPR scoring back in week 4 when these teams played. Now, the Denver rushing defense has gotten a little better since then. They aren't an elite unit against that territory. Overall, as a defense, they are elite. But this is a spot where I do think Josh could have another solid game here. Of course, the reason he's a top 5 running back for us this week. So if they continue giving him the opportunities, not only as a rusher and a receiver he's had all year, he will continue to have success. I do like the Raiders to win this game, which of course is a positive for the game script and outlook for this matchup as a whole. Joe Mixon against Pittsburgh had a very high 35 touches in week 1 against Pittsburgh, the first time these two teams played. Really interesting. He had 9 opportunities in the passing game, 9 targets, 7 receptions. I think a lot of that was because of the pressure TJ Watt and the pass rush was getting on Joe Burrow. He had to dump off the football quickly, get the ball out of his hands. We'll see if that has the same effect here in the week 11 matchup, but it is something worth monitoring and worth noting. He could have himself another really nice game. Jonathan Taylor against Philadelphia this week. On paper, it's been a matchup that I've overvalued in terms of its difficulty as of late. Philly's run defense has not been great, and they've allowed the likes of Dameon Pierce and the Texans to stay in a contest on, what was that, a Thursday Night Football game, and really give them a run for their money. We saw in this past week's matchup both Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson not only keep the game close, but win by double digits against Philly, hand them their first loss of the season, and both of them went north of double digits in half PPR. If the Colts can just be competent in this game, and I get it, I'm not trying to overreact. I'm asking for competence here, not above average play. If they can just do what these other teams have done, the recipe for success is to run the football and make Jalen Hurts be a viewer from the sideline. That's the way to go in this game. JT looked healthy last week. There was a lot of positive signs for JT owners. Let's hope we can carry and ride that momentum here into week 11. Nick Chubb here could arguably be ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I still don't know how I feel about Chubb in this potential avalanche of a football game. Again, if you haven't heard, Buffalo expecting 4 to 6 feet, not inches, feet of snow on Sunday for their game. So we'll see what happens here. Of course, there's the iconic Shady McCoy game in the snow for Philadelphia back in the day. I expect that they're going to be shoveling their asses off pregame, trying to clear as much of that out of the way as possible, but these weather conditions could be ugly. If Chubb totes the rock 25 to 30 times in this game, we might see a ton of Kareem Hunt as well, just because they might not want to give the ball to Nick Chubb 40 times here, but this could be good for the ground game. It could make cutting and change of direction very hard for defenders. We'll see what happens. It's a really interesting thing to think about here, and weather is honestly a factor in my rankings big time. If you want to see how bad it hurts some of the receivers in my rankings, go check that episode out. But Chubb against Buffalo here, my number 8 running back for this week. And then Dalvin Cook against Dallas. The Dallas run defense has been the kryptonite that teams like the Green Bay Packers, especially finding that as their Achilles heel lately, have been able to take advantage of and really use to offset the pass rush strengths that Dallas has had throughout the year, kind of slow down their turnover differential as well. If Minnesota can catch wind of that and hand the ball off a high amount of times to Dalvin Cook and establish a strong run game, keep the game close throughout, it is interesting thinking about the kind of opposite ends of the overtime win-loss spectrum that these two teams have right now. Could be a positive for the Cowboys, could be a negative for the Vikings having that huge win. They might, honestly, both of them, I expect to be exhausted, and that might benefit the ground game as well, just moving people out of your way and simply handing the football off, asking for yardage to be gained there. But interesting dynamic. I do think that this is a solid matchup, despite on paper it looking a bit tough. All right, next up here is my tier 3. I could have had any different arrangement or assortment of these players, but I do feel that these guys are a very strong group of running backs to host for this week on your fantasy rosters. I kicked it off with Ramondre Stevenson as my RB10, as we know, and I've said here on the channel multiple times this season, this Pats offense, this central point is Ramondre. They run through him, and if he's not cooking, the whole offense is basically stale and can't move the football downfield. They need him to have around 20 touches a game, no fewer than probably 18, to keep things afloat. This is a team that's coming off of a bye week. Hopefully that extra preparation helps, although I did see an interesting analytic that Bill Belichick as of late has not been super sharp off of byes, so slightly concerning. The Jets matchup is tough, but Ramondre did get, I believe it was 24 opportunities in the Week 8 matchup. Aaron Jones coming off of one of his higher touch count games of the season. He had a 70% snap share and a 26 touch performance for 156 yards against the Cowboys. Again, alluding back to that Dallas matchup, their run defense. It's the one way to offset Micah Parsons in the pass rush. Run the football, keep them tired, gassed, needing to play physical for 4 quarters. It worked for Green Bay last week, could work for Minnesota if they're able to execute this week. But for Jones, the Thursday Night Football this week against the Tennessee Titans, he just needs his touches. If he gets his touches, I think the offense is set up for success and can build upon him from there. He is how this team needs to continue to operate the rest of the way. And then Alvin Kamara against the Rams. I think that the Rams overall looks like a really hard matchup. It might get slightly easier here as this offense continues to deteriorate. There is an opportunity for the Saints to majorly control time of possession, have a lot more time with the football in their hands, and overall dictate the pace of this game. But if we're being honest, this seems like 2 bad football teams squaring off this week. It's kind of an unpredictable wild card X factor type scenario for Kamara. He's just a great running back who catches passes out of the backfield. Dalton's still the quarterback here. A couple of positives there, but he has been underwhelming the last couple of weeks. Tier 4 now, the running backs 13 to 15, kicking it off with Dameon Pierce. He's got the Washington Commanders this week. It's an above average matchup. It's not super easy, but they grind that thing out with him every single week. Doesn't have the best ceiling in the world, but the floor tends to be very solid. Tony Pollard taking on Minnesota this week. I wouldn't expect Zeke to be too factored into this matchup. He was active in terms of being available for walkthroughs on Wednesday. However, that is not to me indicative of contact at practice. So for me, it's another week of Tony Pollard being the man. Of course, his explosiveness is felt every game, and I do feel that he could have yet again a very strong usage game after having a career high in that metric last week in his rushing attempts and overall touches. Miles Sanders coming off of a slightly down game. Actually, it was a pretty down game against Washington. Had his 2 worst games this season against that team. So, a warning sign for Dameon Pierce owners this week. But for Sanders this week, he's got Indy, another tougher matchup. He just needs touches and opportunities. He was efficient in the game against Washington, just got 12 rushing attempts. So at the end of the day, if you see him get closer to 20 looks, he'll probably have a solid game. If he gets in the end zone as well, that helps and contributes to the cause. But that doesn't happen every week, so you've got a rushing quarterback and a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. Tier 5 here. Now, some unexpected love is going to be given to a player at the end of this tier that I typically just absolutely bash on, but David Montgomery kicks us off. We've got a ways to go before that point against the Atlanta Falcons in an above-average matchup for this team. Khalil Herbert has been placed on the injured reserve, knocking him out for at least the next 4 games. That opens a great opportunity window for Montgomery, who has a beautifully easy schedule the rest of the way to take advantage, have 19 plus, I should say 18 to 24 touches per game rather than 19 plus. That was just kind of a blunder on my part, but he should see increased work and opportunity in this offense. At the end of the day, that's what you're looking for here. Opportunities, volume is the name of the game in fantasy football, and David Montgomery just saw a surge to his work on a week-to-week basis in that category. James Conner, really, really interesting situation here in Arizona right now. Benjamin balled out when this guy was out of the lineup with his rib and ankle injuries. And then 2 weeks after James Conner returns, he gets the axe and is cut from the team. And I went and looked at the numbers on his snap count percentage. This guy played 96% of the freaking snaps in Arizona last week against the Rams. So he wasn't super efficient, did score 2 touchdowns though. It seems like the Cardinals are very competent and content riding it out with one workhorse running back here. Maybe Keontae Ingram gets some more run. But for Conner, looks like a beautiful scenario for him. Jamal Williams taking on the Giants this week. Look, DeAndre Swift is still limited at a 31% snap count percentage last week. As long as he's not getting a full workload, Jamal Williams, and heck, even beyond that point in time, has fantasy lineup utility. Deontay Foreman, tough game script potentially here against Baltimore, could knock him out of the contest early and create a bust level situation, but this offense has an identity, and it's the run game. And as long as this matchup is close, Foreman has fantasy value, can be an RB2 in that sense. CPAT has had under 40% of the team's offensive snap count percentage in his first 2 games back off IR. He is, though, extremely talented, a great playmaker, and dynamite with the football in his hands. He needs more touches. Last week did not cut it. I still think he's better than Tyler Algier. The coaching staff needs to realize that as well and get CPAT more involved. And then Devin Singletary, giving some love here to a guy who is on the fringe of my top 24. He is my running back 21 for this week. I hated on him and had him a sit candidate, and then after hearing about the weather conditions in Buffalo, basically, creating an assumption for me that the pass game is going to be a fickle part of the game script there. They're going to run the football more. It's probably going to be more with Josh Allen. Now that I, think about it thoroughly here, I could, have my optimism for Singletary bite me in the butt still. My pivoting optimism, if you will, because again, I did start as a negative viewer of him heading into the week. But overall, there should be more opportunities in the run game for this team in this week's matchup. It is a good matchup on the ground against Cleveland. Some nice things could happen here for Singletary owners. Tier 6 now, getting to the bottom of the list for today's episode. So Antonio Gibson as a matchup this week I really like, and I went and looked at some of the numbers from this past week's game. If you recall earlier, both him and Brian Robinson had double-digit scoring against Philadelphia. Both scored a touchdown. Both were lineup-worthy players. This week, they have a matchup against the Houston Texans, the easiest matchup on the ground analytically for fantasy football running backs this season. And I see a very even split here amongst these two players. So Gibson's going to see more work in the passing game, especially with J.D. McKissic out right now. J.D. was not able to practice on Wednesday. That is important because if he does it on Thursday as well, that's a pretty negative indicator for his availability on Sunday. However, both of these players have a good opportunity in this game. You're going to see typically the goal line rushes head Brian Robinson's direction, although Gibson is more than capable of handling some of them as well. It was a 52-48 snap count percentage split, so nearly 50-50 amongst these two players. Isaiah Pacheco here, taking over the lead job in Kansas City, getting more opportunities and work. 16 rushes for him, 82 yards this last week. 1 total rushing attempt combined between CEH and McKinnon. Pacheco right now at 56% of the team's offensive snap count percentage, appears to be the lead back and has a great matchup this week. Najee Harris at the 25 spot against Cincinnati, an underrated defensive team. Najee, it's just an encapsulation of his disappointing season to this point. Still doesn't have a 100-yard game from scrimmage, only has 3 total touchdowns on the year, entering into, game number 10. So that's pretty bummerish here, if you will. Disappointing, probably a better way to say that. I don't think bummerish is a word. And just overall, this team has been disappointing offensively. They showed some hope last week. Najee had his first 20-yard rush of the season, but I'm still going to be a bit underwhelmed with my expectations for them heading into this week's game. And then DeAndre Swift and Michael Carter here. So DeAndre Swift, again, we talked about with Jamal, just a 31% snap count percentage last week. It grew a little bit, but that's still a puny number, and he needs to see more work. That's, the talent is there. We know that the opportunity is there, or can be there. It just isn't right now for health-related reasons, I'm assuming still. And then Michael Carter against New England struggled the first time around, didn't have a good yards per carry number, and I believe as well James Robinson, who we're going to see here in just a second, might see his role grow a bit in this matchup. Potential red flags for Carter heading into this week's matchup. Last year here, so my running backs 28-30, starting off with James Robinson. Still have not given me a Jets headshot photo to use, so Robert Saleh, please get on that. The fantasy football community is dying for your help here. J-Rob, though, is not a Jacksonville Jaguar. He is a New York Jet. As I said, they did acquire him via trade before the deadline this year. They want to get him involved. He had the last 2 weeks to learn more about the playbook and potentially have Saleh increase his role. Really, that's not Saleh's job. That'd be Michael Fuller's job. But at the end of the day, I do think he could continue seeing his 40% snap count percentage that we saw the last time out with the Jets grow a little bit here. I do think he's the better goal line back, the better lead back on first and second down. We'll see what the case is here. This is a tough matchup, as I said, but overall, there is some reasons to be optimistic. Kenyon Drake could potentially, and it sounds like he's going to see Gus Edwards back there in the backfield with him. Drake's been phenomenal the last 2 weeks without Gus available for the entirety of those contests and not being available at all the last time out here. So we will see what that has in store for Gus Edwards' value. I do expect Kenyon to still see the bulk of the work unless Gus is close to 100%. Nonetheless, though, it is definitely a negative and detrimental thing that he is back in the offense for Kenyon Drake's fantasy stock. Gus Edwards, of course, is a touchdown vulture and a pretty solid back in his own right, can get out there and handle the lead duties. I am a little bit lower on him, though, as I said, for this week after missing multiple games. I just tend, especially for lower-end running backs, to be a bit more cautious with my evaluation there. And then Eli Mitchell, as I said, only had a 35% snap percentage in the 49ers offense. However, he did have a 50-50, 20 total opportunity workload for this team, splitting dead even with Christian McCaffrey. So that is worth noting. If he does that again, which is probably not going to happen every week, but if he does, it is interesting to say the very least. He could be a very low-end running back 3 or flex if you absolutely need so, especially in a standard league because he's not super involved in the passing game, although he did have 2 targets last week. He had 18 on the ground. So there you guys have it, my top 30 running backs here for Week 11 Fantasy. If you guys enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, like today's episode, share it with your friends, all that great stuff, whatever you want to do. We appreciate you guys helping us grow here and supporting the Sizzle Fantasy Sports community. So thank you guys so much. I will see you in a future episode. Peace out.